They say living well is the best revenge, but sometimes the perfect vengeance is standing in a simple gown, sipping wine, and watching the man who destroyed my life dig his own grave. That Saturday night, I only came to do my job. Instead, I witnessed a flawless tragedy I did not even have to direct. The most expensive thing in a room full of billionaires is never the money, it is the truth. Hello, dear listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here with me today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us without the budget to operate, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future and will transition our operations entirely to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel to listen to exclusive, incredibly satisfying true stories that are much longer, feature highly detailed situations we cannot make public on YouTube, and are brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors. You can easily join by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the Patreon link in the video description or pinned comment. Now, let us begin today's drama, focusing on the story of a 41-year-old woman named Hannah Clark. The air inside the grand foyer of the museum was thick with the scent of old money, expensive orchids, and imported cologne. This was the most prestigious and exclusive art gala in Chicago, a highly anticipated annual ritual where the city's billionaires, private collectors, and elite socialites gathered under one roof. They came to inspect not only the multi-million-dollar masterpieces on display, but also each other. The massive crystal chandeliers cast a cold, unforgiving light on the restless crowd, highlighting the glittering diamonds and the sharp, bespoke suits. I stood near the back of the registration line, comfortably blending into the background. At 41 years old, I had learned a crucial lesson about power. The most dangerous people in a room are rarely the loudest. I wore a simple, unbranded midnight blue silk dress. I had no heavy diamonds around my neck. I wore no ostentatious designer logos. I relied solely on clean lines, perfect tailoring, and a quiet, unassuming presence. The long line inched forward at a painfully slow pace. The soft, elegant hum of a live classical string quartet played in the background, regularly punctuated by the clinking of expensive champagne flutes. I was just glancing down to check the time on my watch when a familiar, agonizingly arrogant voice sliced through the ambient noise, speaking right over my right shoulder. Well, well, here to find a rich husband. I did not need to turn around to know exactly who it was. That smug, mocking cadence belonged to Julian, my ex-husband, and clinging tightly to his arm like a custom-made accessory was Chloe, my former best friend, the very same woman who had seamlessly slipped into my life, manipulated my business, and destroyed my marriage exactly 3 years ago. I slowly pivoted on my heels to face them. Julian was dressed in a sharp tuxedo that likely cost more than a decent used car, his dark hair meticulously slicked back. He looked exactly as he always did, predatory, arrogant, and deeply pleased with himself. Beside him, Chloe wore an emerald green sequined gown that desperately screamed for the room's attention. She tilted her head to the side, her lips curling into a sickeningly sweet, pitying sneer. "Honestly, Hannah," Chloe purred, her voice dripping with absolute fake sympathy. "It is incredibly brave of you to show up at an event like this all by yourself. Did you have to save up your salary for months just to buy a basic entry ticket? Or are you just hoping someone will drop a charity check into your purse by the end of the night?" Julian let out a low, patronizing chuckle, looking me up and down, clearly dismissing my understated silk dress. He leaned in a fraction closer, his heavy cologne instantly making my stomach churn with disgust. "This is a closed circle. Hannah, the men in this room are looking for highly profitable investments, not pathetic liabilities. You really should not embarrass yourself by pretending you still belong in our world." I looked at them. I really looked at them. 3 years ago, their ruthless betrayal would have shattered my entire reality. Now, they just looked like a pair of poorly cast actors performing in a remarkably cheap play. I kept my face entirely impassive. I did not frown. I did not flinch. I just offered them a polite, utterly vacant smile and confidently stepped up to the front of the registration desk. The young receptionist, a girl in her early 20s with a tight bun and nervous, exhausted eyes, offered a practiced, robotic greeting. "Good evening, madam. Invitation code, please." Julian scoffed loudly from directly behind me, deliberately making sure the wealthy couple standing nearby could hear his mockery. "You better check if her invitation is counterfeit. She does not exactly belong on this guest list." I completely ignored his childish taunt and held out my phone, displaying the bespoke, highly encrypted QR code I had been given. The receptionist raised her scanner and scanned the code with her tablet. Usually, when a standard guest was approved, the tablet screen flashed a soft, welcoming green color. This time, it did not. The screen flashed a deep, pulsing burgundy red. A harsh, distinct beep echoed loudly from the device, cutting through the polite chatter of the lobby. Julian practically vibrated with malicious, triumphant joy. "I knew it," he mocked loudly, gesturing wildly toward the security guards stationed near the main entrance. "Come on, Hannah. Do not make a pathetic scene. Just walk away before they have to drag you out into the street." But the receptionist did not call for security to throw me out. Instead, all the color instantly drained from her face, leaving her looking as pale as a ghost. Her eyes widened in absolute shock as she stared at the flashing red screen on her tablet, and her practiced, customer service demeanor completely vanished into thin air. She abruptly stood up so straight it looked physically painful. Her hands trembled visibly as she reached up to grab the heavy-duty radio clipped securely to her left shoulder. "Inform the chairman," she spoke into the radio, her voice breathless, frantic, and filled with undeniable awe. "She is here." Julian stopped laughing instantly. His smug, victorious expression froze in place, slowly morphing into utter, unadulterated confusion. Chloe blinked rapidly, her fake, pitying smile dropping completely as she stared at the panicked receptionist. "Wait, what is going on?" Julian demanded, his voice completely losing its polished, arrogant edge. "Who is here?" Before the terrified receptionist could even attempt to answer his demand, the heavy wooden double doors near the private VIP corridors violently swung open. The crowded room parted instinctively as two massive, broad-shouldered security guards in immaculate black suits marched directly and purposely toward the registration desk. They completely ignored the surrounding billionaires, the famous celebrities, and the elite socialites. They entirely ignored Julian and Chloe, nearly brushing them aside like irrelevant obstacles. The two intimidating guards stopped right in front of me, bowing their heads in perfect unison. "Right this way, madam," the taller guard said, his deep tone dripping with the kind of immense deference usually reserved only for royalty. "The VIP elevator has been held exclusively for you." I turned my head slightly, catching the expressions of Julian and Chloe out of the corner of my eye. Their jaws were practically resting on the cold marble floor. The arrogant sneers were entirely gone, completely replaced by a horrified, clueless bewilderment. They stared at me with wide, panicked eyes, looking as if I had just grown a second head right in front of them. I did not say a single word to them. I did not need to. I simply adjusted my small clutch, gave the terrified receptionist a polite, reassuring nod, and let the two men in black suits escort me through the parted sea of Chicago's absolute elite, leaving my ex-husband and my ex-best friend standing there, choking on their own bitter malice. As the heavy gold-plated doors of the VIP elevator slid shut, sealing me away from the chaotic whispers of the lobby, the suffocating tension finally left my shoulders. I stood alone in the quiet, mirrored cabin, watching the numbers light up one by one as I ascended to the penthouse level. Looking at my reflection in the polished glass, I barely recognized the fragile, broken woman I had been 3 years ago, the woman Julian and Chloe had left for dead. The memory of my divorce was not a loud, dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, meticulous execution. For over a decade, Julian and I had built our art gallery from the ground up. I was the eye, the relentless researcher who discovered the talent and authenticated the classical pieces. Julian was merely the charismatic salesman who shook hands and charmed the investors. Yet, while I was buried in catalogs and restoration workshops, Julian was busy with his lawyers. Over the course of 12 months, he had systematically and secretly transferred all the intellectual property, the exclusive client lists, and the holding company assets into a brand new corporate entity, an entity co-signed by him and his newly appointed junior partner, Chloe. When the trap finally snapped shut, I was pushed out into the freezing Chicago winter with a meager settlement check that barely covered 6 months of basic rent. But the financial ruin was not the blade that cut the deepest. It was the psychological manipulation. Months before the divorce papers were served, Chloe, my supposed best friend, had sat in my living room, holding my hands with a look of deep, sisterly concern. "You look so exhausted, Hannah," she had murmured, her voice laced with poison disguised as honey. "You need to take a break for your mental health. Step back for a few months. I will help Julian handle the gallery while you recover. You trust me, right?" I did trust her. I stepped back, completely unaware that her definition of handling the gallery included moving into my office, wearing my clothes, and eventually sleeping in my marital bed. By the time I realized the truth, I had already been entirely erased from my own life. Starting over from absolute zero at the age of 38 is a terrifying endeavor. My reputation in the local art scene had been quietly poisoned by Julian, who painted me as an unstable, bitter ex-wife to anyone who would listen. So, I stopped trying to fight him in the sunlight. I retreated into the shadows. I applied for a low-level, entry-tier appraisal position at Viridian Vault. To the general public, Viridian Vault was completely unknown, but to the elite echelons of the global art market, it was the ultimate, undisputed authority. It was a hyper-secretive, ruthlessly powerful private advisory and restoration conglomerate. Billionaires, royal families, and national museums did not make a single purchase without Viridian Vault silently verifying the provenance of the art in question. They hired me because my resume was flawless. Even if my recent history was fractured, I kept my head down, working in the windowless basement archives, analyzing canvas weaves and paint pigments under harsh fluorescent lights. I did not complain, I just watched, and my eyes, sharpened by years of genuine practical experience, never missed a detail. Within my first 18 months, I quietly flagged 3 separate, highly sophisticated forgery cases that had completely bypassed the senior verification team. We were talking about counterfeit Renaissance and post-impressionist pieces, supposedly worth tens of millions of dollars. I found the microscopic anachronisms, a synthetic binder in a 17th century oil, a historically inaccurate canvas stretching technique hidden beneath the frame, a forged provenance document typed on a machine that did not exist until 10 years after the supposed date of the letter. My silent interventions saved the conglomerate from catastrophic financial losses and unimaginable public humiliation. I did not ask for public credit, but the right people noticed. Marcus Sterling, the billionaire founder of Viridian Vault, was a man who cared absolutely nothing for high society politics. He cared only about results, accuracy, and absolute discretion. Following my third major discovery, I was called to his private estate. He did not offer me a meaningless plaque or a standard promotion. He offered me the absolute apex of the pyramid. He secretly appointed me as the supreme head of appraisal. It was a phantom role. My name was scrubbed from the company directory. My signature on authentication certificates was replaced by a highly encrypted digital seal. From that day forward, I operated entirely in the dark. I became the invisible judge, the final executioner who held the power of life and death over every single major transaction the conglomerate touched. No one outside of Marcus and the board of directors knew my true identity. To the world, Hannah Clark was just a washed-up, discarded ex-wife. But in reality, I held the keys to the kingdom they were all so desperate to enter. The elevator chimed softly. breaking the absolute silence as the doors glided open to reveal the penthouse level. I stepped out onto the thick, charcoal-colored carpet and walked directly toward the heavy mahogany doors at the end of the corridor. There were no nameplates here, no receptionists, no signs of corporate bureaucracy. This was the fortress of Marcus Sterling. I pushed the heavy doors open and entered the cavernous office. The entire far wall was a continuous pane of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a dizzying, panoramic view of the glittering Chicago skyline. Marcus stood with his back to me, staring out at the grid of city lights. He held a heavy crystal glass of bourbon in his right hand, his posture rigid and commanding. Even in his late 60s, the billionaire founder of Viridian Vault radiated an intense, intimidating energy that demanded total compliance from anyone who entered his domain. "You made it past the circus downstairs," Marcus said, not bothering to turn around. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that echoed slightly in the vast, quiet room. "I had a slight delay at the registration desk," I replied, taking a seat in one of the sleek leather chairs facing his massive obsidian desk. But the security team handled it with their usual absolute discretion. Marcus finally turned, walking over to his desk and heavily setting his glass down, his sharp, calculating eyes locked onto mine. There was no time for small talk. In Marcus Sterling's world, time was measured in millions of dollars, and tonight was no exception to that rule. "This gala is nothing but an elaborate smokescreen, Hannah," Marcus stated, leaning forward and resting his hands flat on the polished black surface. "The champagne, the string quartet, the minor charity auctions happening on the second floor, all of it is just a highly publicized distraction to keep the press and the socialites busy. The real business is happening tonight, right here in the shadows. We are finalizing the acquisition of the Sapphire Collection." I kept my expression perfectly neutral, though my mind immediately shifted into high gear. The Sapphire Collection was legendary in our industry. It was a private curation of post-war abstract expressionist paintings that had not been seen by the public in over 4 decades. It was the white whale of the art market. "The agreed purchase price is $150 million, Marcus continued, his tone clinical and precise. "The buyers are a consortium of European investors who demand absolute, bulletproof certainty. They will not wire a single cent until Viridian Vault issues the final, cryptographically secured certificate of authenticity." "I completed the preliminary spectral analysis on the digital files 3 days ago," I responded smoothly, matching his businesslike tone. "The physical inspection is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Why the sudden desperate urgency tonight?" Marcus picked up a sealed, unmarked manila folder from his desk and slid it across the smooth surface toward me. "Because the brokering agent representing the seller is in a remarkably desperate position. His gallery is massively over-leveraged, teetering right on the edge of federal bankruptcy. If this deal falls through, he loses absolutely everything. His creditors will strip his assets down to the bone within a week." I opened the folder. The very first page was a meticulously detailed corporate profile of the brokering agency, complete with banking records and debt ratios. I stared at the bold black ink at the top of the page. It was Julian's gallery, the very same gallery we had built together, the one he and Chloe had ruthlessly stolen from me. My breath caught in my throat for a fraction of a second, but I forced my heart rate to remain steady. Julian was acting as the sole middleman for a $150 million transaction. His entire career, his remaining wealth, and his pathetic, arrogant facade downstairs were all hanging by a single, fragile thread, and that thread was directly connected to the anonymous signature of the supreme head of appraisal at Viridian Vault. My signature. He needed my invisible blessing to survive. "There is a severe complication," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, slicing through my realization like a surgical blade. "Early this morning, 5 members of my executive board received highly encrypted, anonymous emails. The sender claims to have indisputable proof that a senior executive at Viridian Vault is quietly accepting massive bribes to falsify authentication reports." I looked up from the financial file, my eyes narrowing sharply. A calculated smear campaign aimed at whom exactly? The emails did not name you specifically, Marcus replied, his jaw tightening in visible anger. They just referred to the final evaluator, the phantom appraiser, but the timing is far too precise to be a mere coincidence. Whoever is sending these messages is actively trying to inject extreme doubt into the board right before we authenticate the Sapphire collection. They are trying to destabilize the deal, or worse, blackmail the conglomerate into rushing the approval process without conducting our standard, rigorous physical inspections. The scattered puzzle pieces violently slammed into place inside my mind. I thought back to the suffocating lobby. I remembered the sickeningly smug look on Julian's face and the absolute, unwarranted confidence radiating from Chloe. They had no idea I was the one pulling the ultimate strings at Viridian Vault, but they definitely knew something dirty was happening behind the corporate curtain. My intuition flared, hot and sharp, painting a very clear picture. Julian and Chloe were not just arrogant socialites attending a party. They were the desperate architects of this chaos. They were aggressively pushing this massive sale, and if someone was planting toxic rumors about a corrupt appraiser, it was a preemptive strike. They were trying to manipulate the board, forcing Viridian Vault to rubber stamp the collection in order to avoid a massive, brand-destroying public scandal. They are trying to force a blind approval, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but laced with absolute, terrifying certainty. If the board is panicked about a potential bribery scandal leaking to the press, they might pressure the appraisal department to expedite the Sapphire certification. They want us to close the deal quietly and bury the noise before the media catches wind of it. Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes dark. Exactly. And if there is something fundamentally wrong with that collection, if even one of those supposedly priceless paintings is a clever forgery, Viridian Vault takes the entire fall. Our reputation as the gold standard of the art world would be obliterated overnight. I closed the manila folder and pushed it back across the wide desk. The cold, analytical part of my brain took complete control, shutting down any lingering shock. Julian thought he was playing a brilliant, high-stakes game of corporate chess downstairs. He thought he was cornering a faceless, bureaucratic corporation. He had absolutely no idea that the executioner waiting for him in the shadows was the very woman he had thrown away 3 years ago. Let them play their pathetic game, I said, my voice as cold as ice. I am going back down to the main lobby. I need to see exactly what kind of trap they think they have set. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, a grim, predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. Do what you do best, Hannah. Tear their narrative apart. The descent in the glass elevator felt entirely different this time. The higher I went, the clearer the air had been. But as the luxurious cabin lowered me back into the belly of the gala, a thick, suffocating weight pressed heavily against my chest. The opulent main hall was now packed to its absolute limit, a swirling sea of silk, velvet, and ruthless ambition. I navigated through the dense crowd, keeping my eyes fixed straight ahead, but I could instantly feel the microscopic shifts in the atmosphere. Near the grand marble staircase, a small cluster of older men in bespoke tuxedos suddenly stopped talking as I walked past. They were executive board members of Viridian Vault. They were among the very rare, select few who actually knew my face, though they only knew me as a highly specialized consultant, not the supreme head of appraisal. Tonight, however, their usual polite nods were entirely absent. Instead, they stared at me with narrowed eyes, their gazes heavy with cold suspicion and unspoken accusations. The poison of the anonymous emails had already begun to infect their minds. They were looking at me not as an asset, but as a severe, impending liability. I needed a moment to gather my thoughts away from their piercing stares, so I steered myself toward the dimly lit alcove leading to the women's powder room. It was a secluded, narrow hallway lined with tall mirrors and heavy velvet drapes. I had barely taken 2 steps into the quiet corridor when a hand suddenly gripped my elbow. The grip was tight, sharp, and entirely unwelcome. I turned to find Chloe blocking my path. The emerald sequins of her dress, catching the low light like the scales of a venomous snake. She backed me up against the velvet wall, trapping me in the narrow space. Her previous public mockery was gone, replaced by a chilling, intimate intensity. "Hannah, listen to me very carefully," Chloe whispered, her voice dropping into a tone of fake, sisterly concern that made my skin crawl. "I am only saying this because we used to be friends, and I honestly hate seeing you embarrass yourself like this. I know why you are really here tonight." I kept my face perfectly still. "Is that so, Chloe?" She let out a soft, patronizing sigh, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind my ear, a gesture so deeply invasive I had to force myself not to slap her hand away. "Julian and I know you have been taking odd jobs, consulting for the lower-tier authentication firms, just scraping by. We know you are probably working as a hired hand for someone at this event, trying to fetch coffee or carry folders just to stay afloat. But you need to leave, right now, before things get incredibly ugly." "I am perfectly fine right where I am," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. Chloe leaned in closer, her heavy floral perfume invading my personal space, suffocating me. "You do not understand. Hannah, high society is not forgiving to desperate people. If your employers find out how unstable you are, or if a certain rumor reaches them about your past behavior, you will not even be able to get a job sweeping floors in this city. Just walk out the back door. Save your dignity." Before I could formulate a response to her sickening hypocrisy, a bizarre, synchronized sound echoed through the alcove. Then, it echoed from the main hall. It was the sharp, distinct vibration of hundreds of cell phones receiving an urgent notification at the exact same second. The soft hum of the string quartet was instantly drowned out by a wave of gasps, hurried whispers, and the frantic tapping of screens. Chloe pulled her phone from her clutch, her eyes scanning the screen. A slow, triumphant smirk spread across her face, confirming exactly what I already suspected. She was part of the orchestration. I stepped around her and walked briskly back toward the edge of the main hall. The entire room had ground to a sudden halt. Billionaires, socialites, and board members were all staring down at their glowing devices. A mass email had just bypassed the event's secure network, landing directly in the inbox of every single guest in the building. I did not need to look at a phone to know what it said, because I could see the massive digital displays near the charity auction stage suddenly glitch. The screens shifted from displaying elegant artwork to projecting the contents of the leaked email for the entire room to witness. The subject line was blazoned in bold red text, condemning a corrupted evaluator. But it was not just text. Attached to the vicious allegations of bribery and market manipulation were highly detailed, time-stamped photographs. My breath hitched. The photos showed me standing in the dimly lit loading dock of Julian's private art storage facility just 3 weeks ago. In the images, I was handing a thick, unmarked envelope to one of Julian's known associates. The caption below the photo explicitly accused me of being a rogue, bitter ex-wife who was actively blackmailing the gallery owner, threatening to ruin his massive upcoming sale unless I was paid a massive sum of hush money. The whispers in the room erupted into a deafening roar. Hundreds of eyes shifted from the glaring screens directly to me. The board members I had passed earlier were now whispering furiously to their security details. I was completely surrounded, the walls of the grand hall suddenly feeling as though they were closing in to crush me. Right on cue, the crowd parted, and Julian stepped forward. He walked with the slow, measured pace of a benevolent king approaching a treasonous peasant. He stopped inches from me, his face molded into a mask of deep sorrow and tragic disappointment. He was playing his role flawlessly for the audience of powerful investors watching our every move. "Hannah?" Julian said, his voice loud enough for the immediate circle to hear, dripping with fake pity. "I truly did not want it to come to this. I tried to protect you. I tried to keep your extortion attempts quiet, because I know how much you have struggled mentally since our separation." I took one step closer, invading my space just as Chloe had done minutes earlier. He leaned down, dropping his voice into a vicious, menacing whisper that only I could hear. Just quietly disappear from Chicago, and I will tell my lawyer to withdraw the data theft charges. Run, Hannah, run while I am still feeling generous. The silence in my immediate vicinity was deafening. The trap had snapped shut with brutal, flawless precision. To everyone in the room, the story was clear, tragic, and utterly convincing. The discarded, unstable ex-wife had tried to extort the brilliant, successful gallery owner, and she had just been caught red-handed. The doctored photos were a masterpiece of manipulation, the lighting and shadows perfectly blended so that no casual observer, not even a trained eye at first glance, could ever spot the digital tampering. The evidence felt solid, heavy, and insurmountable. I was standing in the center of a room filled with the most powerful people in the country, and Julian had just publicly branded me a criminal. I was completely pinned to the wall, trapped in a narrative meticulously designed to destroy me once and for all. The suffocating silence in the room stretched for a grueling few seconds, heavy with the collective expectation of 500 powerful guests waiting for me to break. They expected me to burst into tears. They expected me to scream denials at the glaring digital screens, or perhaps lower my head in absolute shame and run toward the nearest exit, just as Julian had so generously suggested. Instead, a quiet, genuine smile touched the corners of my mouth. I looked into Julian's eyes, seeing the pathetic, shallow triumph swimming in his gaze. I raised my hand, placed my palm flat against the pristine lapel of his terribly expensive tuxedo, and shoved him backward. It was not a violent push, but it was firm enough to completely break his invasion of my personal space and send him stumbling back half a step in sheer surprise. I did not spare him another glance. I smoothed the fabric of my simple silk dress, squared my shoulders, and walked precisely in the opposite direction of the exit doors. I walked straight toward the elevated central stage. The murmurs of the crowd rippled and parted like a tidal wave as I moved with unwavering purpose. Every camera lens, every skeptical eye, and every judgmental whisper followed me. I climbed the 3 carpeted steps to the main podium, stepping directly under the harsh, brilliant glare of the stage spotlights. Marcus Sterling was already standing there, holding a wireless microphone, projecting an aura of terrifying, unyielding authority. When I stopped right beside him, the entire grand hall fell into a state of absolute, breathless paralysis. Marcus slowly raised the microphone. His deep, gravelly voice echoed off the marble pillars, instantly commanding the attention of every single billionaire, investor, and board member in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his tone entirely devoid of warmth. "It seems we have experienced an unexpected disruption in our network tonight. Someone has gone to great lengths to distribute severe anonymous allegations regarding the integrity of Viridian Vault and our appraisal protocols. They have accused a senior executive of corruption, attempting to force our board into a state of panic regarding the $150 million acquisition of the Sapphire Collection." Marcus paused, his sharp eyes scanning the sea of faces until he locked directly onto Julian and Chloe, who were standing frozen near the center of the room. "The sender of these emails demanded that we bypass our final security protocols to avoid a public scandal," Marcus continued, his voice echoing like thunder. "But Viridian Vault does not operate on fear. We operate on absolute truth. Therefore, I believe it is time to formally introduce the person targeted by this pathetic smear campaign. For the past 6 months, the broker of the Sapphire Collection has been desperately begging my office for a meeting with our supreme head of appraisal, hoping to secure the final signature required to close this massive deal." Marcus turned slightly, gesturing toward me with his free hand. "Allow me to introduce her. This is the supreme head of appraisal for Viridian Vault, the absolute final authority on every transaction this conglomerate authorizes." If a pin had dropped in that massive hall, it would have sounded like a gunshot. Down in the crowd, all the blood instantly vanished from Julian's face. His jaw went completely slack, his eyes widening in a display of pure, unadulterated horror. The smug, victorious facade he had worn just 3 minutes ago shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Beside him, Chloe looked as though she had been physically struck. She swayed on her expensive heels, her hands flying up to cover her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between me and Marcus, as her brain struggled to process the catastrophic reality of the situation. I calmly reached out and took the microphone from Marcus. With my other hand, I pulled a small digital remote from my clutch and pointed it at the massive screens projecting the fake blackmail photos. I pressed a single button. The doctored images of me in the dark alleyway instantly vanished. They were replaced by a highly complex, brightly colored chemical spectroscopy report and a series of microscopic cross-section photographs. I will not waste a single second of your time addressing those amateur, fabricated photographs. I spoke into the microphone, my voice steady, cold, and echoing with absolute analytical precision. Instead, let us discuss the real reasons someone was so desperate to discredit me tonight. Please look at the screens. What you are seeing is the chemical breakdown of the paint layers from the centerpiece of the Sapphire collection, an abstract masterpiece supposedly painted in 1954, valued alone at $42 million. I clicked to the next slide, highlighting a spike on the chemical graph in bright red. Yesterday afternoon, I conducted a preliminary spectral analysis on the digital high-resolution scans provided by the broker, I explained, scanning the silent, captivated audience. The analysis revealed trace amounts of a specific synthetic polymer resin mixed into the titanium white pigment. That specific binding agent was not invented, nor commercially available, until 1962, which means the $42 million centerpiece of this collection is a breathtakingly well-executed forgery. A collective gasp echoed through the room. The board members of Viridian Vault, who had looked at me with suspicion just 10 minutes ago, were now staring at the screen in absolute shock. I locked eyes with Julian. He looked entirely lost, shaking his head slightly as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. Now, one might assume the brokering gallery was simply negligent, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air. Julian, you were so blinded by the prospect of a massive payout that you completely ignored the severe gaps in the provenance documentation. You bought into a lie because your gallery is currently drowning in debt, and you desperately needed this $150 million lifeline to survive. Julian opened his mouth to speak, to defend himself, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by the public dissection of his failures. But the true tragedy here is not just your incompetence, Julian, I continued, twisting the knife with surgical grace. It is your partner. I clicked the remote. One final time. The scientific graphs vanished, replaced by a series of international banking records and encrypted communication logs that our security team had intercepted. Julian did not know the painting was a forgery, I announced to the room, my voice ringing with indisputable authority, because his own wife, Chloe, bypassed him completely. 3 months ago, Chloe initiated a secure communication with a known European black market syndicate. She secretly accepted a wire transfer of $2,500,000 to act as an inside operative. I pointed directly at the glaring bank routing numbers on the screen. Her job was to quietly swap the genuine masterpiece out of the collection and replace it with a flawless counterfeit while the collection was in transit. In exchange, the smugglers promised her 20% of the final sale value in an untraceable offshore account. She sold out her own husband, completely willing to let him take the federal fall for art fraud, while she walked away a very wealthy woman. The crowd instinctively stepped away from Chloe, leaving her entirely isolated in a small, empty circle of polished marble. Julian turned to look at her. His eyes filled with a sickening mixture of rage and profound devastation. Chloe was hyperventilating, shaking her head wildly, tears of sheer panic ruining her flawless makeup. "No," Chloe choked out, her voice cracking. "No, that is a lie. She is lying." "The financial records are verified by federal banking authorities," I replied coldly, shutting down her pathetic denial instantly. And that brings us to the events of tonight. Chloe learned that the Supreme Head of Appraisal was scheduled to conduct a rigorous physical inspection of the canvas tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. She knew the forgery would not survive a microscopic examination by our experts. I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at the two people who had once destroyed my life. So, Chloe panicked, I concluded, delivering the final, devastating blow. She hired a hacker to forge those blackmail photos and launched a smear campaign against the final evaluator tonight, hoping the executive board would push the deal through blindly to avoid a media scandal. It was a desperate, vicious strategy. Her only mistake was that she launched a blind strike in the dark against the phantom expert of Viridian Vault. I let a cold, fleeting smile cross my face before I delivered the absolute truth. She had absolutely no idea she was declaring war on me. The immediate aftermath was absolute, unforgiving chaos. Within 30 seconds of my presentation concluding, the three lead representatives of the European consortium abruptly turned their backs on the stage and pulled out their cell phones, barking frantic orders at their legal teams to instantly sever all ties with Julian's gallery. The room, previously filled with polite, muted whispers, erupted into harsh, open condemnation. Other major investors and collectors who had ongoing contracts with Julian began physically backing away from him, treating him as though he were infected with a highly contagious disease. He was not just losing the $150 million deal, he was losing everything. His career was instantly annihilated, and the glaring evidence of international art smuggling meant he was now staring down the barrel of severe federal prison time. The luxurious facade of the perfect, wealthy couple shattered completely right there on the marble floor. Julian suddenly spun around and grabbed Chloe by the arm, his face contorted in vicious rage. He screamed at her, entirely forgetting the hundreds of elite spectators watching their downfall. He cursed her for ruining his life, while Chloe shrieked right back, her voice shrill and hysterical, blaming his crippling debts for forcing her hand. They tore into each other like feral animals, tearing away the last shreds of their manufactured dignity. It was a pathetic, ugly display, completely devoid of the elegance they had so desperately tried to project all evening. Suddenly, Julian let go of Chloe and broke through the small circle of onlookers, rushing toward the edge of the stage where I stood. The security guards immediately stepped forward to intercept him, but I raised my hand slightly, signaling them to hold back. Julian looked up at me, his eyes red and brimming with absolute desperation. The arrogant sneer from the registration desk was entirely gone, replaced by the pathetic, pleading look of a drowning man. "Hannah, please," Julian choked out, his voice cracking violently. "You cannot do this to me. We built that gallery together. We were married for 15 years. Please, tell the board to hold off on the authorities. You have the power to fix this. Save me, please." I looked down at him. I searched my heart for any lingering trace of anger, any residual pain, or even a spark of vengeful joy. But there was nothing, only a deep, quiet stillness. "I did not set a trap for you, Julian," I said, my voice calm, level, and utterly devoid of sympathy. "You fell because you cannot survive in a room without me cleaning up the trash you create." I turned my back on him for the final time and walked off the stage. The gala resumed its steady hum of elite networking as I seamlessly slipped out through the side doors. The cool, crisp Chicago night air hit my face, immediately clearing the stifling scent of expensive perfume and desperation from my lungs. I walked to the quiet employee parking lot. Opening the door of my modest, mid-range sedan, I sat in the driver's seat and let out a long, slow breath. I reached down and unbuckled my expensive high heels, tossing them casually into the passenger seat. I drove away from the glittering museum, pulling into a brightly lit, completely ordinary gas station to buy a simple cup of black coffee. Sitting in my car, sipping the hot, bitter drink, I did not feel like a victorious queen who had just conquered her enemies. I did not feel an overwhelming rush of euphoric triumph. I just felt incredibly, profoundly light. The suffocating ghost of Julian was finally, permanently exorcised from my life. Tomorrow morning, I would wake up, drive to my secure office, and do the complex, fascinating work that I absolutely loved, living a life that belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. I would love to know where you are listening to this story from today, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying and enjoyable, please remember that YouTube has disabled our monetization, meaning we have no budget to continue operating and will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future. We will be transitioning our work entirely to Patreon. Please help us keep going by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel to listen to the absolute best, most exclusive, and incredibly detailed true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen or by clicking the link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you again, and take care of yourselves.